Good evening, campus, it's me, Q. Today we're going to talk about Olga Tokarczuk's most recently published novel, The Empusium. Love her, hate her, laud or applaud her, Olga Tokarczuk is the greatest living Polish author of our times. She won the Nobel Prize in 2018, and there's a bit of a curse with winning the Nobel Prize. People say that after that your books seem to tank and go downhill. Well, we'll see if that's the case. And I would like to argue I would be a fairly good sense check on that, based on the fact that part of my PhD was on the works of Olga Tokarczuk, meaning that I've read pretty much everything published in English. Now, The Empusium is a very Tokarczukian novel, in the fact that it doesn't really have... Where's Drive Your Plough Over the Bones of the Dead? Nevertheless, The Empusium is a very Tokarczukian novel, and this is going to be hard to say, but if you've only read Drive Your Plough Over the Bones of the Dead, that was a book that Olga Tokarczuk published just to fill a publishing contract. It's the only plotted book that she ever wrote. Is the books of Jakob plotted? I mean, I suppose it is, but it's not as plotted as Drive Your Plough. But Drive Your Plough really is an anomaly within the universe of Olga Tokarczuk. She's not interested in plot. She's not really interested in character. She's interested in ideas and place. And one of the greatest literary feats that covers place and ideas is Thomas Mann's The Magic Mountain. Now, here I have to say, I've not read Thomas Mann's The Magic Mountain. And after getting halfway through this, I had to buckle and buy Thomas Mann's The Magic Mountain. So I'm going to read The Magic Mountain soon enough. But any comparison towards Thomas Mann is not mine to make. I would be pulling it out my rectum like an overly robust tapeworm. But in saying that, I do know that the protagonist, Kastrop, spends time in a sanatorium. And here, our protagonist, Voynich, spends time in a sanatorium. Precisely this sanatorium, which was kindly provided in the advanced reader copy by Fitzcarraldo. So thank you, Fitzcarraldo. Thank you for sending this. This is Gorbensdorf, a sanatorium where people with consumption went to die. Even if you know nothing about linguistics, Gorbensdorf sounds fairly German, and this is in Germany. This is actually in Poland nowadays, Sokołowsko. Our narrator Mieczysław Voynich, of which, yes, I'm going to default to the last name Voynich throughout the entirety of this, has consumption. And we see him very early on being treated by the doctor. He has very enlarged nipples, and that is consumption, dear people. In the early 20th century, the more trendy name was Morbus Cock. How fun. This catalytic consumption is the reason why Voynich must go to Gorbensdorf, and there he will stay, and there the remainder of this novel plays out. Now, if you know nothing about Gorbensdorf, you know nothing about the Magic Mountain, just look at these pictures. Like, they're isolated, they're in the middle of nowhere, and that is where conversation can start. And within the Empusium, conversation starts, and it really never ends. Voynich is surrounded by a cacophony of men, all of whom talk about why women are submissive, subordinate, and ultimately weak. Empusium is undoubtedly misogynistic. I don't think Tokarczuk doesn't know that, because within the author's note, she says that these ideas that she is perpetuating within this book comes from highly influential men within the literary scene. Is Mann doing this within the Magic Mountain? Again, I don't know. I've not read it. Stop asking me. Yeah, but in the early 20th century, we have a bunch of men who are absolutely secluded, somewhat trying to fool themselves that they're not going to die of consumption. What else is there for them to do? But that's not really the question you should be asking. The main question we should be asking is, why are they so obsessed with women? Because within Gorbensdorf, there's not a single woman in sight. Well, when Voynich arrives at the sanatorium, he meets Frau Opitz. I mean, he sees her shoe in the door. She's a servant. She brings him his food. But later on, she dies. And everyone doesn't really know why she's dead. Everyone has their own theory to what has happened, but this talk turns to gossip, turns to rumour, turns into rumination. While all the men have different things to say, they ultimately all come to the same conclusion, which is that women are lesser than men. Tokarczuk really has mastered irony at this point. There are no women present, there are no women voices, yet the only thing that you are ever going to talk about is the women. Women are spectral, and they make up the horror aspect of the Empusium, whose subtitle is A Health Resort Horror Story. But don't go into this thinking that it is a pure horror novel. It is nothing like Drive Your Plough. In saying that, I would say that the Empusium is very similar to House of Day, House of Night, but I'm aware for English readers this is a nightmare to get hold of. However, if you have ventured into books of Jakob, Yenta are crystallized. Why is she crystallized? How Yenta is perceived is in the same way that the Empusium treats all women. Before we whittle on, there's something I really need to tell you, and that is, what is an Empusium? Well, it's a contraction of two words. The latter ium comes from symposium, a talk, a collection of ideas. We know that. We have all the men secluded away just chatting. We understand that. Bon appetit. The prior part, the Empusa, it comes from a Greek word. It's a shape-shifting woman. Now, I've already alluded to the spectral, invisible quality of women, but Tokarczuk here gives voice by talking about the folklore, by talking about the murmuring going on within the trees that only comes to life once the men drink their mushroom concoction that makes them hallucinate. Side note, the diet of the men in this novel is worse than the recipes that are contained within Iris Murdoch's The Sea. If you know, you know. While all of this sounds tense and impactful, it's actually not. That's the really frustrating bit about the Empusium. Voynich basically ignores the murder plot of what has happened within chapter 2. Kind of just gallivants around his days talking to the men, and even the gothic aspects of the witches in the forest doesn't really bring any tension to this novel, ultimately making the last 30 pages of this book a very weird experience. Allow me, I'm trying to gauge where my audience is. It's not as violent as Melchor's Paradise. It's not as funny as The Bee Sting, and it is nowhere as excited as The Birthday Party. These scientific men see themselves rooted in rationale and logic, which means all of the natural elements, and therefore women are irrational and illogical. That's pretty much how you could summarize this all up. And we see this explored and executed better in Drive Your Plough Over the Bones of the Dead. But that observation is left to meander, and what we have here is meagre small talk spanning a lot of pages. Now, one of the questions that I imagine many readers will have reading the Empusium is that if they've not read The Magic Mountain, is this a good modern interpretation, retelling, feminization of Mann's work? Again, I can't answer that. If there's any positive that I can say is that the Empusium has given me the kick up the bum to read The Magic Mountain. This feels lackluster. It feels half-baked. It feels as though Tokarczuk is trying. Feels to me that Tokarczuk wants to revisit House of Day, House of Night, but by isolating herself up in the mountain and entrapping herself in Mann's thoughts, I assume. She's given us a book that waves the feminist flag at half-mast. To reiterate, the Empusium is a very Tokarczuk novel. Again, ignore Drive Your Plough. It literally was a contractual obligation that she had to write a novel, so bashed it out. It's very different to anything else. It's read Flights and come back to me. It's going to annoy so many people, but it's true. But yes, the Empusium feels like a Tokarczuk novel. It feels familiar. It feels as though you're in the hands of a great author. Sadly, we've covered this territory before, and we covered it better, in my humble opinion. But you're only here for the score. We've learned that. For me, the Empusium is a 5 out of 10.